Right, so this video is a response and expansion on some ideas put forward by fellow glitch addict Just Some Funny a couple of weeks ago in his video with a very similar title to this one. I do agree with most of the points that Funny makes, but I'll be going over them as well as some things he missed and expanding because I think there's more to say on this subject and how indie shows are structured in general. There are endless complaints through the YouTube comment section, Reddit, Twitter, and any other unwashed corner of the internet that people may talk about these things, that indie animations and animated shows in general are too short. The sentence, "What happened to the old days of 24-episode seasons," has been burned into my retinas like the Fox News logo on your aunt's TV. This is something that probably needed to be talked about properly for a bit, but Funny was the first to actually have the idea. In his video, he posits 5 key ideas around indie production. Number 1. The wait between episodes is problematic for some viewers of these shows. Number 2. It's not possible for indie shows to be long anymore because of the price of animation. Number 3. Media in general is becoming shorter because of our attention spans and intelligence decreasing. Number 5. Indie shows aren't actually too short, 4 episodes is the length of an entire movie. And number 5. The pilot method of creating shows is incredibly harsh, especially on YouTube. So let's start at the beginning. Regardless of whether a show is funded and animated by the mighty Glitch Productions or done by one dedicated worker in his mum's basement between shifts at Pizza Hut, every indie show must begin with a pilot. Why? Because animation is expensive and time-consuming, and it is a fool's errand to make a show that people don't want to watch. We'll come back to this point a fair bit, but the audience is the key here. Animation projects, really any creative projects at all, can only be successful if people actually enjoy consuming the content. Regardless of the effort a studio puts into their show, how smooth their animation is, or how well the backstory of the main character's grandma's neighbor may be, it doesn't matter if people aren't watching. That is the purpose of a pilot. To see if people actually like the show enough to warrant creating more of it. The issue with pilots is that they are a horrible way to start a show. To effectively communicate to the audience what the show will be about, the creators need to jam the pilots full of all the different elements that may come up, because they don't want to leave the audience not seeing any of their cool ideas. This contrasts heavily with the proper style of a first episode of a series. That episode is more often than not slower, in a more grounded environment to help the audience get to know the characters and the world they've found themselves in before we kick off into the action. For fans of D&D and or Stranger Things, I'll give this analogy. The level 1 party that has just met up in the tavern for the first time won't suddenly be approached by the king of the nation and told to go kill Vecna before he genocides the world. That is undoubtedly the most interesting and exciting element of the story, but it doesn't belong at the start. This is where even shows like the Knights of Guinevere and the Gaslight District feel a little bit off to me. I've barely gotten to know Frankie, Andy, and Sparky, and suddenly I'm thrust into this massive laboratory filled with giant murder robots. Or I've just figured out what color the blood in this universe is supposed to be, and now 2 of the 7 virtues have been destroyed by an angry fat man with a cleaver and a torrent of angel crows. So, why do indie creators do stuff like this when it's not very healthy for their shows in the long run? Well, that would be because of the massive period of time that takes place between the pilot and anything else from the series. It took over a year for episode 2 of Murder Drones to release after the pilot, and that show was made by a fairly well-established studio at that point. For most projects, that time is going to be even longer. As Funny says, with a more traditional streaming service publication, you will get to see at least half of a season in quick succession, so writers are able to get both the build-up of the opening episodes and the payoff of a big event that can happen more naturally once we get to know these characters. I've recently been rewatching the best version of the Marvel comics to be brought to screen in the form of the 2010 Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. The first disc of this show, yeah, this is in a DVD release, contains introductions to all of our main cast, a good setup for what the world is like and the structures within it before the massive supervillain breakout turns things on its head and leads to a high-impact moment that is incredibly memorable. Indie shows can't afford to do this. They simply don't have the time. The unfortunate problem with recognizing this, however, is now indie shows will force themselves into a box because they don't think the show will be able to last more than a handful of episodes. The Amazing Digital Circus was written from the ground up with only 9 episodes in mind. Murder Drones was only ever going to have 8, and other shows will be expecting the same or even less. This is unfortunately the most responsible way to create an indie show. If it's going to take you 3 years to make 8 episodes, then trying to plan a full 24 episode season is preposterous. By the time you're done, the audience that started watching your show will be an entire decade older and likely not even interested in the content anymore. Think about what you were interested in 10 years ago. Would you still like to watch that now? For some, this may not be a problem. As Goose has said, 5 hours of content is not a small amount of time, and there is definitely a lot that can be done in that period. Some stories may only need a few episodes to be successful, and the digital circus is one of them. The story the show is based on is only 12 pages in length, so an adaptation that spans 2 full feature-length movies is massive by comparison. But that temporal restriction does massive damage to other shows. Murder Drones remains my favourite show of all time. I love it dearly, but I will admit that there is probably at least 3 episodes worth of content that was squished into spaces it probably shouldn't have been, or just left out entirely for only the dedicated to figure out by themselves. A large world like this with longer history and more characters requires more time than the self-contained world of the digital circus. Having only 4.5 hours to get through this entire story made the show too fast. There was too much going on for lots of people, and that hurt it overall. Because the thing is that people like myself and like you if you're watching this video are the outliers in this situation. We fall in love with productions like this and are willing to go searching for the hidden and lost pieces of information about it. People who watch content like mine are willing to go back and rewatch the episodes and find details that were missed and yet are vital to understanding the story, or at the very least willing to watch a guy on YouTube go back and look for them. The average viewer is not like that, and it's something you realize when you see reaction channels and other celebrities watch these shows. I don't think I've ever finished a reaction of Murder Drones because the people in these videos miss things that I see as so painfully obvious, but in reality are very well hidden until you get told about them or really look for it, like the fact that you're now breathing manually. The average viewer of an indie show, especially an indie pilot, will only watch it once. If that viewer doesn't subscribe to the channel posting and turn on notifications, in a year's time when the second episode releases, do you think they'll even remember that they saw the pilot at all? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Nobody can remember a single video that they saw an entire year ago. And that brings me on to another one of Funny's points. The wait time between episodes is too long. Not for committed fans who really like the series, but for casual viewers who only watch the show once. These viewers won't get frustrated at a lack of disclosure around a new release date, they simply will forget the show exists at all. As is the infinite struggle on YouTube, you either stay in people's feeds all the time or you get forgotten. And that brings me to Funny's last point, which I don't really agree with, and even he was hesitant on saying in his video. Media in general is getting shorter because of our decreasing attention spans and intelligence. I'll comment on the second half of that statement first because it's something that psychologists, including the ones that lecture me at university, study. There is a phenomenon in the study of intelligence known as the Flynn effect. That being that over the course of recent history, the average IQ of a population has been consistently increasing over time. It suggests that rather than getting dumber, humans have actually been getting smarter as time goes on. The interesting thing to note here though is that over the course of the last decade or so, the Flynn effect has stalled. Average IQ has remained steady instead of rising. This may be one of the main contributors to the perception of the world becoming stupider. We aren't. We just also aren't getting any smarter. Attention span is more difficult to pin down. Sure, the rise of apps like TikTok and the increased use of short-form brain rot content suggests that people are less willing to watch long-form videos, but the success of shows like Stranger Things and Arcane contradict that by staying popular up until the very end. We can take this one step further and look at Iron Lung, a movie that for all intents and purposes was way too long and could have fit pretty neatly into a time slot that's 25% shorter. Yet people, especially young people, absolutely loved it, to the point where it almost beat out a 20th Century Fox production for the best movie of its opening weekend. I think what we can ultimately figure out from this is if the project has the support of the people, if it has a big enough audience that simply just want to enjoy it, then it will succeed regardless of how long it ends up being. So are indie animations too short? Yes. They rush their starts, try to compress too many ideas into too small of a time frame, and take too long to release the individual episodes. They don't appeal to the common viewer who won't watch them all the time, and really require lots of dedicated fans in order to be successful. In the end though, it doesn't really matter.